Here at the Listening Post, we've covered media stories all over Latin America, Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, Ecuador, and Honduras, to name just a few. But we've never gone to Cuba. It's a notoriously difficult place to get accreditation, let alone talk to journalists. Most of the media on the island are state-run. It's been that way ever since the revolution in 1959, when Fidel Castro overthrew the US-backed Batista government with a socialist one that's still in place. Many dismiss the media in Cuba as mere relics of its Cold War past, Soviet-style propaganda machines designed to control the masses. Now there's a diplomatic transition underway, a rapprochement with the US, aimed at ending decades of animosity between the two countries. As the relationship with Washington changes, Cuban media outlets like Granma, Huventud Rebelde, Radio Havana will undoubtedly change too. There's already been some reform and opening up of Cuban media. Accreditation and access are easier to get. Officials are more open to talking, although there are still plenty of red lines the journalists there know better than to cross. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro from Havana now on the media landscape, the changes taking place, and what it all means for journalism in Cuba.
To understand the story of Cuba and the media, you have to go back to the late 50s, when Che Guevara and Fidel Castro started broadcasting their revolutionary advance from a rebel hideout come makeshift radio station in the mountains of Sierra Maestra.
Aquí Radio Rebelde desde un punto de la Sierra Maestra en el territorio libre de Cuba.
Today, much of the state media remains the same. Granma, the official voice of the Cuban Communist Party, has been persistently purveying good news for 50 years now. And for those who sell it, print it, read it, it's played a key role in keeping the revolution alive.
Granma will continue forever. We will not give up on our achievements. People sacrificed their lives for the revolution, so we're going to keep Granma because we don't want anything that goes against our ideology. Our ideology is a revolutionary one, unlike in any other country.
Fidel has always seen the strategic importance of the media, ever since Radio Rebelde started broadcasting from the mountains of La Sierra as a way of getting the message out about the revolutionary struggle against the Batista dictatorship.
You can only understand the Cuban Revolution properly if you understand the relationship between the country's leadership and the people. That began with Fidel talking to the million people who would gather in Revolutionary Square. But then it spread to media like TV and this newspaper, Granma. It was through this newspaper that some of the country's key decisions were announced. Fidel would come here himself and write pieces to announce new laws as they were being passed.
For years, that level of involvement fed into criticism that Castro was a one-man show and no friend of the free press. It's unlikely he would have disputed that. It was very much part of how he and his co-revolutionary, Che Guevara, envisioned the role of the media for the revolution. And that has its own history, which goes back to Guatemala and the 1954 CIA-funded coup that deposed the democratically elected president. Che Guevara was there and saw how one of the most important weapons in the CIA's artillery was a clandestine radio station, La Voz de la Liberación, the voice of liberation. It was a turning point for Che Guevara. In an interview conducted after the revolution with a Colombian journalist, he said, "We have to get rid of all newspapers, because you can't have a revolution with press freedom. Newspapers are the instruments of the oligarchy."
When Fidel Castro came to power here in 1959, he was only too aware of how important the role of state media would be in propagating the message of the revolution. Outlets like Granma and Huventud Rebelde have been leading with that story ever since. A wariness and a suspicion of outsiders has been hardwired into these outlets, but that's changing, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Editorial nuance is changing too, about what can and can't be said.
Those changes came when Raúl Castro replaced his brother Fidel as president and surprised many by taking a different approach to the media. In 2011, he made a key speech calling for the end to secrecy in Cuba's journalism. It sounded promising, but in practice, it was far from being Cuba's glasnost. Reporters Without Borders, the Paris-based media watchdog, publishes an annual index ranking all 180 countries on their record for freedom of the press. In 2011, the year Raúl Castro made that speech, Cuba was 167th on the list. That's 13th from the bottom. 4 years later, Cuba's ranking has gone down, not up, to 169.
Raúl made a call to end all secrecy, because in Cuba there have been many forbidden areas of information that blurred the boundaries of what might become hurtful for the revolution. If any country tried to deal with Cuba, and the United States knew about it, these countries were punishable by law because of the blockade imposed on Cuba. That meant the Cuban press closed itself too much. But today, we are aware of that, and of the importance that the Cuban press has for the Cuban people.
This notion of Cuban journalism being characterized by secrecy should be understood in the context of an island under siege, and what that implies whenever the revolution's project is perceived to be under threat. Of course, this is also used as an excuse by some in the government when they make mistakes and want to avoid being held to account.
Since 1974, Cuba has applied a model of press control based on the Soviet one. The Central Committee's ideological department has the job of supervising the media, and its position differs from that of Raúl Castro's. That's why whenever Raúl Castro says that the media need to take a more critical attitude, the department steps in and threatens to dismiss more independently minded journalists. So there's a real duality going on at the moment.
Esa dualidad es la que se está dando en este momento.
Fernando RAVSBERG should know he's often fallen foul of the Cuban authorities for publishing pieces on Cuba's sacred cows, education, health, political leadership. Cuban policy on the media may seem a bit paranoid, but Cubans have their reasons. Located just 90 miles away from its ideological enemy, it's seen a US invasion, Bay of Pigs in '61, multiple assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, including one involving an exploding cigar. Radio Martí, a US-funded broadcaster set up with the sole purpose of undermining the Castro government. And most recently, a digital twist, a secret social media program called Zunzuneo, or Cuban Twitter, designed to foment Arab Spring-like protests in the country. It was masterminded not by the CIA, but by USAID, which is meant to deliver humanitarian aid. That drew sharp criticism from Congress.
Were you aware of this program in Cuba?
No, absolutely not. And if I had been, I would have said, what in heaven's name are you thinking?
Text messages were being sent to young people to promote some sort of implosion within. They were expecting the country's youth to rebel against the government, and it was hoped that what happened in Libya and Syria would be imitated here. New technologies such as Facebook and Twitter were used to try and foment those so-called springs. But with a historic announcement, a diplomatic breakthrough, the iconic image of that handshake between Obama and Castro, this story arc has moved. From Cold War to political thaw, and a changing scenario for public debate in Cuba, with old binaries defrosting, albeit at a glacial speed.
Está habiendo un movimiento, es lento.
So there's a change going on. It's just going to take time. It's going to be slow because the system in place has too much power to marginalize its critics. I can assure you that there are plenty of colleagues here in Cuba who are desperate to be doing a different kind of journalism.
As long as we have a growing debate about the model of development we want for our country, as long as there are different perspectives, more people working out options as to what path to take, the less risk we have of making a wrong decision.
Growing debate, different perspectives, new voices, in a developing story that was once penned by one editor-in-chief. It remains to be seen how Cuba will write the next rough draft of its history, revolutionary or otherwise. But there are plenty of contributors ready, waiting to file their reports.